Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to Aquarius Rising Africa with me, Chantelle, your hostess with the mostess. Welcome to you all in the chats. Glad to have you all back with us again this evening, and of course, or this morning, this afternoon, wherever in the beautiful world you are. Have Dr. Dennis back with us again. Witches of Appalachia. I'm back, I see. So good to have you all back, everybody. But before we do that, let me just go through our announcements for the week and draw up the schedule. There we go. There it is. Okie dokie. So Beverly Road shows, you've missed those. Fantastic shows we're doing at the moment. Looking into some old criminal cases. In fact, on Monday, we were looking at on Aquarius Rising Africa. Again, the royals and the stuff that's going on there. Andrew, Epstein, Harry, that everything going on behind the scenes. Super, super interesting. And then, of course, the mini-series with the Ankara field, explaining what that is. Check that out on Solutions with Shanti. Jamie J on Tuesday, great show, talking a lot about the childhood trauma, birth trauma, pre-birth trauma. Fantastic researcher Jamie is, so catch our shows there. And then, of course, on Tuesday again on Solutions, Beverly and I were doing spiritual forensics, checking out what was the that gosh, the nun. I forget the nun. The most she killed the most people on the planet, basically, as a woman, the nun. And we were checking her out, which is super, super interesting. Jesse, unfortunately, I had double trouble internet yesterday. So we did some reruns yesterday, but we did the membership Charlie Kirk decode, which is super interesting. So if you want to watch that, please do. And yay, of course, Dr. Dennis tonight. We're talking about the witches of Appalachia. Drop in with Shanti tomorrow at 2:00 Central Africa time. And yeah, that's just stuff that's all us conspiracy theorists just getting together, hanging out for an hour on a Friday, checking at things I've seen on my screen for the week and talking about them. So join me for that. It's fun. And then, of course, in the afternoon, and about Curva, she's the survivor from the professional tennis arena, let's call it that. Her father, stepfather / coach being a handler and abuser. Always shocking that. And then, of course, tomorrow evening, again, Leo Zagami. Saturday, amazing show with Penny Bradley. And then, of course, Sunday Loop, we replay our reruns. Yeah, so just again, a nice little gathering with everybody. Yay, nice to see you all, everybody. And without any further ado, Rasputin, mother, thank you, Mama Leon. I'm like, oh my gosh, did I really have to have mashed potato brain today? Mother Rasputin was her name. My goodness, what a crazy nun she was. No, she was not a nun. That was absolutely my take on that one. There was no nun. She was an operative. Anyway, hello, Dennis. Welcome back. Nice to see you again. How are you?
I'm doing good. Yes, I've been doing a lot of deep research here recently, and getting some of my more investigative research. I was explaining to somebody the other day, Chantelle. There's different types of research. My favorite type is deep research, deep investigative research. You can just read a book or read a magazine article or something. That's research. Whenever reading the TV guide or whatever you're doing a little research, okay? But to do in-depth investigative research, you have to immerse yourself completely into it and go deep into it. You know what I'm talking about, because you do that too. You do that very well. And you've got to get into your subject and look at it from all angles and understand it.
Right.
And, that is one thing that I've told people over the years that I find so very fascinating about my research that I've done for many, many years in the occult. and what I like to call the occultic societies. These are groups of people that get together and do occult stuff. And occult, by the way, the word actually means hidden knowledge. And these people work off of that kind of stuff, you know. But
Exactly.
and when you look at the occult, the broad look at it, it is definitely knowledge, and it is hidden and secretive knowledge to a certain degree, because that's how the power of these societies get. You know, they have their own secret rituals and things that they do, and they're even their different symbols. They have a symbology that's all their own. It's like a language. They have their own language. It's amazing. The deeper you get into it, the more you see how these people operate. You know, and
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's
yeah,
so much. If we also, and I mean, this is why we got, for those of you who catch Jessie's shows, I must say she's brilliant with that in terms of reading the sigils, the symbolism, the buildings, all the
yeah,
badges, you know, their decode, listen to me, the decode, no. Yeah, all their sigils and logos, the signs that they use, the symbolism. There's so much. And of course, we know it's their hidden language. But many of us are starting to wake up to what that is. And we are
yeah.
actually starting to really unveil everything. By the way, everybody, I wanted to say happy Thanksgiving to all our American viewers. I really wish you guys a beautiful, beautiful day. And thank you all for supporting this little channel. I'm so appreciative of each and every one of you. And I hope that together we will give a lot of kids, animals, beings a lot to be grateful for, because this knowledge certainly sets people free. So happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I'm very grateful to all of you. And to you, Dennis, for being here tonight.
Yeah, well, I'm thankful for channels like this, and I get so much information from it, and listening to people like Jesse and all that too. That helps my research. You know, we're all connected, no matter which way we look at it, and we are supportive of each other in that respect. I hope we are most of the time. We try to be, I think, and that's
Yeah,
where our power lies. You know, we're unified in that way, and that's great. You know, I'm very thankful for that we have and for friends like you and all that stuff, and for people that are my colleagues and are interested in the things that I like as well. This is all fascinating. You know, I mentioned the other day, Chantelle, what are we here for? You know, if we can't be here for each other, you know, definitely that's what we need to be very, very thankful for. You
exactly.
know, I, um, I was telling some of the
Yes.
kids, I like to talk with kids a lot, little children and all that. And I was telling them the other day about the crocodile. I actually wear some crocodile teeth on my hunting hat here. And they are always fascinated by that. They have to ask me about it, you know. And I say, well, now, if you see a crocodile walking around with no teeth and he's looking for me, you haven't seen me, okay? But I was telling them about the interesting thing about the crocodile being thankful. You know, reminds me of the story. The crocodile, when the crocodile eats you, eat something, he cries. He has tears that come out of his eyes. And that's where we get the term crocodile tears, which means you act like you're sad for somebody and you're not, you know, or you're sad for something and you're not really, you know, hypocritical kind of thing, you know. And I said, the reason the
Exactly.
crocodile cries when he eats, you know, supposedly he doesn't get real emotional about what he's doing. What's really going on, and I will explain the natural aspect of this, he has glands in his eyes that when he moves his jaws, they automatically you tear up. They're like tear ducts that work to clear his eyes out because his eyes are very sensitive. If you ever get in a fight with a crocodile, hit him in the eye because that's where he's very sensitive at. Okay, and but anyway, that's why they cry. Okay, they're not really crying. It's just that the eyes are getting watered up and cleared out. But people, you know, that have seen that, like in Africa and other places, where in Australia, where crocodiles and all that live, have noticed that, you know, that happens. So I will tell the little kids, don't be like a crocodile. Be sincere, okay? Don't cry while you eat somebody. But it's really funny. But yeah, listening to people and connecting with all these different shows and all that, and my own experience, many years with the occult that I've been interested in. There's the most interesting aspect of the occult to me is the connection with folklore. Folklore is fascinating stuff to me, and I love it. As a matter of fact, I'm a member of the American Folklore Society, and we have regular meetings on this stuff. That's all we talk about, the folklore and the cultures of the world, not just one place. You can't take just one country and say, I'll specialize on this. It's really fascinating to take it all in, because how we're interacted with our own folklore. And the subject today that we're going to talk about with the Appalachian witches is very deep in folklore. And I love that kind of stuff, definitely. And that's why I've studied it so much over the years. And I'm going to say something about the Appalachian mountain range, okay? And if our listeners are not familiar with it, it is one of the longest mountain ranges in the world. It's on the list, definitely. And it runs for well over 1,500 miles long. And it goes into parts of Canada all the way down the east coast of the United States and ends down in the state of Alabama. This is a long mountain range. And here's the really interesting thing about it, Chantelle. I'll tell people this. Back in the primordial days when all the continents were connected, and by the way, Africa and America were once connected. They were once all connected together. And but also was the mountain range of the Appalachians was connected to the Scottish Highlands, believe it or not. And so you have, and I always thought it was very interesting that most of the people that settled in this part of the United States, they came from Scotland. So really, they were very familiar with this mountain range because that was what they came from. And that's a very interesting connection, that they were people of the land. They definitely, the Celtic peoples were deep into the mystical part of the land itself, and they believed in a lot of the magic of nature itself and the nature and touching that magic, utilizing that magic for certain purposes. When you talk about witches, sorcerers, whatever name you want to give them, and all that, you got to remember something very interesting. It's a coin with two sides, okay? There are some people supposedly who title themselves as white witches. This term means good, good. They're the good guy. They do supposedly good magic and all that. And there's a big category of these people, okay? And they're the sort of the one side of the coin. But on the other side of the coin, which we're going to talk about today, is the dark side. These are the bad people. They're always, and this is humanity. This is a snapshot of humanity, Chantelle. We got good people, we got bad people. That's the way we go. That's human. That's humanity. Yeah. And this shows up in witchcraft. That's where that goes too. But I want to mention, and I cannot fail to mention, when you talk about the Appalachian witches, you got to talk about the good ones first, okay? Supposedly people who are the healers, the people that are helping, the root doctors, as we call them. They are the ones that know all about the natural remedies, the plants that grow. Yeah. You got to look at that. Modern medicine actually comes from that. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of these women were herbalists, they were midwives. They used plants as medicine. And, for me, that is the way we're meant to live anyway. There's no witchcraft involved there. It's really just understanding how nature works and working in harmony with nature and using the offerings that nature gives us, as opposed to what we're doing with nowadays, the medical mafiosa, right?
This definitely is fascinating because when you work with plants and you know what the effects they can have upon the human body. Just take, for example, aspirin that we have today. It comes from the bark of the willow tree, and people have known this for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptians knew it. You chew willow bark, and that was aspirin. Okay, that would help you to have a headache or whatever if you had a headache or what. They knew the effects of these plants. They're very smart people. Yes, most of them were women because they were the ones that had to do this for the household. That was for the home and the family and all this. That they knew these remedies, and they knew these herbs and plants and all that. And what they would do, they could make poultices for wounds or whatever the situation was. It's fascinating stuff. And they knew. And if you were like very superstitious, and you didn't realize what you were dealing with, that would look like magic to you. Somebody said, "Hey, I chewed some willow bark the other day, my headache went away." That's magic. That's the way they looked at it to a certain extent. So they didn't understand that aspect of it. And that's where you get into the folk remedies and the medicine, the folk medicine, I call it. But look, there is a darker side to this too. The dark witches, they knew about these plants like belladonna and nightshade and stuff like that, and what it would also do to you. Okay, that's part of witchcraft. Herbology is part of it. I call that plant witchcraft. That's what it basically is. Herbal witchcraft. But they knew that these things could, like give you. Just take for instance, and I'll give you an example. I don't know if you're familiar with a flower known as the angel trumpet. I know you've probably seen the angel trumpet plants. They have a beautiful trumpet-like flower that hangs down.
Yes.
That thing is very deadly. It's beautiful to look at, but you better be careful how you handle it, because it can give you very violent, deadly hallucinations, even if the juice gets on your skin. This stuff is rough. So you have plants that are very dangerous if you don't know how to handle them and do things with them. And there's a whole list of these plants. I will give you another example. You can eat a potato. Make your French fries or your baked potatoes, mashed potatoes, all day long. But you better never put a piece of the plant or the flower of the potato in your mouth. It will kill you. So the strange thing is you can eat the tuber of the potato, but you better not eat the flower. The flower will kill you. It's poisonous. As a matter of fact, it is kin to belladonna and nightshade. Very deadly stuff. Yeah. That's very strange. See, they knew this stuff, though. They knew all about this stuff and how it worked and how it interacted with humans, beings, and all that stuff. And this appeared to the ancient man and woman like, oh, this is magic. This is something, very mystical going on here. But that's one aspect of this. But then a lot of superstition grew up around these things. A lot of stories and things, just like breaking a mirror will give you 7 years bad luck. The reason that was, they would say stuff like that is because a mirror was very expensive item back in the day. And you wouldn't let kids or anybody handle, hey, be careful how you do that. Break it now. You're going to have 7 years of bad luck. That's just the way superstition went. It warned you of certain things, And what I find fascinating, Chantelle, and things that we have to pay attention to, the granny witches that we talk about in the Appalachians, the old wives' tales that we hear about, the folklore and the stories, all of these things have warnings, guides, patterns, clues to the things that we want to look at, because they are definitely there. All this is based. You can't say it's, a lot of people write off folklore and stuff like this. It's a bunch of junk, I don't believe that stuff. But it is all based in truth. It is all based in real stuff here, that they knew about. And so you can't dismiss it. You got to, pay more particular attention to it. We who study folklore know that without a doubt. I think J.R.R. Tolkien said, the tales of the old wives are never to be dismissed because there's so much knowledge in them. And that's so very true. There's a lot of knowledge. Yeah, a lot of knowledge that goes on this. But now I mentioned the granny witches. I'm going to tell you some stuff about them. They're very fascinating. They're not really witches, okay? They are just very wise women. Yes. They're very smart. And they know a lot of things. We call it kitchen magic to a certain extent. In other words, like I said earlier, they knew a lot about the household stuff that goes with this. But they had their own superstitions, too. They had a belief system that they believed in things. Now, a lot of these things, just to give you an example, and this is fascinating as all get out. I mean, you could I don't know how many shows on this kind of stuff, but they have a lot of superstition built up around the brooms. Okay, you've heard of witches' brooms and all that. That's a very symbolic thing. Once upon a time, the symbol of a woman was a broom, and I find that very interesting because it symbolized her power, her ability to do good things. It symbolized her ability to even to a certain extent, to heal. It symbolized her ability to clean things, and have an effect upon things like that. So the broom was a symbol of power for a woman. This is my household, this is my broom. And women would walk around back in the old days, they would walk around with a broom like a walking stick. The broom was like they would constantly be with them. And they had a lot of superstitions about brooms. Okay, a lot of stuff grew up. I'm gonna give you a few of them just to illustrate the point. If you got like a visitor that you don't want to stay in your house, somebody that's come to see you and you rather they go away, somebody you don't like, the granny witches would tell you could take your broom, turn it upside down, bristles up, and set it in the corner, and that person will leave. That's just one of that's one of the superstitions they believed in. That's how you could get rid of somebody, okay, and make them leave. And that's fascinating stuff, man. Yeah, you could set that broom up on in. And they had another one that if you had a visitor that you may suspect to be a real witch, or maybe somebody was going to do something bad to you, put the evil eye on you or whatever, as soon as they leave your house, they would take the broom and lay it across the door on the inside of the house. That was a sign of them blocking any evil intent that person tried to leave behind. So the broom was not only a cleaning instrument, it was a protective instrument in some ways. It could do certain things, No wonder witches flew around on them. that was one of the things they would do. Yeah. But that's where you get the witches and the brooms at. Yeah, you get the witches and the broom because the broom is a symbol of a housewife. Yeah, that's their symbol. And so it is with witches. That's the way that goes. Now, I've told about this before. The real witches, one of the abilities of real dark witchcraft is the ability to be able to fly, to levitate, to float around or whichever way you want to do it. Yeah. And of course, they accomplished this not with a magic wand, but they mixed a certain elixir together. There was an ornament that they would put on themselves, and they would put this ornament on that allowed them to fly, supposedly. And the broom was a way for them to administer this ornament on their bodies. I won't say what particular part of their body they were doing it with, but you can get the idea of what I'm talking about here. This would go to certain, and it would absorb into their bodies through this organ, and then therefore they would allow them to fly. So the broom had nothing to do with the flying part of it. It was just a way to administer an ornament to get them to fly. That's just part of the history of that. But the broom, I find it to be very fascinating because that is the symbol of women, wise women. That was their symbol.
That's so interesting. I've actually never heard that. I mean, about the brooms and the reasons why the broom is such an important symbol, obviously, in witchcraft. But it makes a lot of sense what you say, as to why they would use it. And obviously, the symbol of, if you look at the woman, it's not just about cleaning the home, right? But the woman, the broom is a symbol of cleaning the home there. But the woman's domain is her home. That's her queendom. That's her palace. That's her castle, right? So she would be absolutely in charge with everything that goes on there, from the cleaning to the cooking to the apothecary to everything, that absolutely stands for that, because she is she is the creative spirit, because if you think about the woman, she is able to give birth. So she grows, she's the creatrix, basically. So I think there has to be something about that as well, in that, which is super interesting. Wow, very, very interesting indeed. I can understand, when we look at stuff like this.
Yeah, the broom being a power symbol, and also, by the way, you could beat rats really good with a broom too, and get them out of the house. So it is it is a symbol of power to a certain extent, definitely, especially household power. That's what these women were looking at.
You could certainly whack your husband across the left ear.
Yeah, you could probably whack them real good with a broom, leave me alone or something, I think I'd rather be hit with a broom than a frying pan. Okay, definitely, anytime. But yeah, you get whacked with that. And I'm gonna tell you something strange, and you can do this. Everybody at home can try this. This is it looks kind of supernatural, but it's not. Okay. But if you do it just right, you can try this, sometime, Chantelle. If you do this just right, you can take a broom, sit it on its bristles in the middle of the room, and you get it to stand there by itself without anything touching it. You can do this if you balance it just right. And you got, if you're not downhill or something. If you're in a pretty level room, you can balance. I have seen brooms stand there for hours without falling over. And it's spooky looking, but it's really physics, okay? It's really physics, modern physics. Because what you're doing is you're balancing that broom perfectly, yeah. But it looks supernatural. I've had people do that and say, hey, look how spooky looking that looks. But you had a lot of this stuff, and this is where superstition comes in. The belief systems that went around this kind of stuff and all that is what they drew off of. It made them. This was a big part of their lives, that they talked about. But when you look at the granny witches, now I'm gonna tell you some really strange stuff about the granny witches. The granny witches practiced a kind of a magic, but that's what I call kitchen magic, and it's not really witchcraft. It is really more or less. Besides plants and stuff like that, it is really more natural, what I call natural magic. The world around us has its own kind of magic, and I'm not talking about Disneyland kind of magic. I'm talking about magic that is part of physics, the physical world that we live in. And the granny witches knew a lot of this stuff very well, but also strangely, Chantelle, it was connected with religion. Too, the religious beliefs played a big role in this, and I'm talking about Christian belief, okay? And they were very religious women to a certain extent. That was part of their makeup. That was part of what they drew on. But they also knew about this natural magic in the world around them, and so this connected up. And there are many stories of granny witches who could actually. Like say if you were to have a very bad burn, get burned real bad, and this would happen originally in the kitchen sooner or later, get burned by a pan or something. They believed that they could talk the fire out of that burn. I don't know if you've ever heard about this, but they believed that you could talk the fire out with a biblical passage, and what they would do is they would blow on this thing and then say the Bible, but they won't say it out loud. They sort of whisper it. The Bible passage over it, and I have found out over the years which passages they use, but they're different ones. But anyway, they're connected to fire, and they would do this little ceremony like over, and supposedly you would not blister, and the pain would go away. Supposedly it was a cure. They would do this also with a cut. Like if you were cut and bleeding and you wouldn't stop, they supposedly could do this and stop bleeding.
Right.
So this is interesting stuff. But this was connected also to their very, very strong religious beliefs too. They felt that they were, connecting to the power of God to do these things in that way, in that respect. Yeah. They didn't see it as witchcraft. Well, we would think that would be something like, witchcraft. It was not that to them, not to the granny witches. This is part, and my mother told me that, her grandmother told me that, so on, so on, so on. This was passed down from generation to generation. And here's the interesting thing about the ability to supposedly to talk out fire and stop blood. That ability could actually be given, but it would you would have to. I think the superstition goes, if you knew how to do it, you could tell me, because we're not related. You couldn't tell anybody that you were kin to. Okay, so we're not related, and it has to be woman to man, man to woman. It can't be woman to woman or man to man. That's just the way this was passed down. Okay, that was some certain rules that you had with this kind of stuff that you had to follow in order to have this ability. I won't call it power. I call it ability. They knew, but I think, a lot of times, here's the interesting aspect of it. Okay, when we look at modern day science, can explain some of this stuff. Blowing, of course, on a burn would give it a little moisture. And if you get burned, I would tell you today, go stick it under the faucet real quick. Cold water will keep it from blistering. Something. What you've done when you burn your skin, you've taken all the moisture out. And if you immediately put that moisture back in, that will help you. So hold your hand. But blowing on it, we always do that. That puts a little moisture on it too, by the way, when you think about it. It's smart when you think about it, but that's the way that goes. But granny witches didn't know that. They just thought that was what you did to cure this kind of thing. And also with bleeding, they would hold it a certain way and whisper over it and all that. That would stop the bleeding sometimes anyway, by a certain way you held a hand or whatever that was. The Vikings even knew about this stuff. I found this traced back to the Viking lore. There were, wherever women were at, all the women knew these things. This was passed down from generation to generation of the women that do this. Yeah. And the men were not involved a lot in it, more so than the women, because like I said, and women talked a lot about these things when they would get together. It wasn't just all gossip, in the kitchen. They would talk about these things like this stuff. They would say, hey, this happened or that happened, but it was all tied into their religious beliefs. There's superstitions and their folklore and their culture and also their families, because this was passed down from generation to generation to generation. You didn't have a book. You had what your great-great-granny told you about. You had that to remember and talk about. Yeah, that's fascinating to me.
But Dennis,
so much of my history.
If we must never forget, like the Scots, the Celts, the Vikings, they were, and the same as the Khoisan, the same as the Australian original people and the first tribes, right? These were all people that were the first tribes on this earth, and they all came in with knowledge. We see the Vikings as bloodthirsty warmongers. That's kind of like the rhetoric that we believe the Vikings to be. But they're not, yes, that's obviously the one side of them as well. The other side is they are actually part of Earth's original grid walkers. So the Vikings have part of their coming in is the original clan, if you will, is to walk grid lines on the earth. Because when you look at the Viking, the runes, you look at nature, and that's exactly what you're saying. What they were
and
doing,
runes,
and when it's authentic done, and
the runes are tied in. The runes are tied into their belief system. They're in belief in Odin and Freya and all these things, the gods. That belief system is tied into their religion, into their belief system, religious aspects of it. Yeah. That's where you get that's where you get the names of the week at,
That when we look at what, obviously the original tribes, they each brought in their gifts, right? Their original gifts for this planet. And what they or humans did with it afterwards was up to our free will and choice. And that's where that comes in, because we had a choice how to use that energy. We've always had a choice. We have a choice whether we have cold water or warm water, right? It's always our choice. Same thing. How do we use certain things? And God has gifted us and gifted especially the First Nations with lots of amazing gifts and understanding of how nature works, how to connect with nature. And you can only do so when your heart is wide open and you are fully, it's like Jesus. Jesus knew when he was healing, he only saw that person in their full, complete light, right? And B, the person who he was healing had to have full belief that healing was possible. Otherwise, it can't work. As a healer myself, I will say it can't work unless that is the alignment. So it's like they understood these alignments, and it's like they understood how nature worked, and they were simply harnessing and working with natural energies from nature, but not abusing them. The problem comes in when we start manipulating and abusing that energy. When we're making use of it, we're fully allowed to. That is God's law. We're allowed to do that. But when we take it and we twist it to serve our own will, like those ladies, like the kitchen witches, as we call them, talk about the burn. They had this knowledge, so they knew to heal someone's burn as a service to someone else. It's like a doctor is today. I mean, except the doctors, some of the doctors, I'm sorry, speak so much freaking nonsense. But my point is that these were people that were of service to humanity, and they had special gifts that they could receive and integrate and obviously assimilate and communicate what that was to others. Now, of course, you're always going to get the suspicions one calling that evil and calling that witchcraft. And it's usually those, the suspicious ones, that are going to take it and twist it to serve their own selfish purposes. That's what I see it as.
Yeah, that's what I said earlier, and I can understand why some of the people looked upon that as magic. You know, it appeared that way to them to a certain extent. I could see why they misunderstood that. Yeah, yeah. But you know, knowledge, Chantelle, knowledge is everything. You know, knowledge gives you a better life if you apply it the right way. You know, and knowledge. Yeah, these women were holders of knowledge. They were containers of knowledge. Not just through the family, but their very cultural system around them. You know, they were that way. Knowledge is good. You know, knowledge is not only good in helping you live good, but also it can be a matter of life and death to a certain extent. You know, it can kill you or heal you. That's the way that goes. And you have to be very careful how, and like you say, there was a good way to apply knowledge and do good things with it, but also there's a bad way, a very selfish way to apply this knowledge and do bad things with it. You know, that's the problem with witchcraft, definitely. Yeah.
The way I see this, actually, the way that it's been badly applied is by the cabal, the medical mafia. As you say, aspirin is the root of a certain tree. Yes, but look what they've done with that root. Look how they have taken God's natural laws and abused them. Now you look at so many people who will happily go to the doctor and get a script of 40 medications and drink. They don't even see that as witchcraft. They can't even see that as there's the witchcraft, because that's saying to you, you don't have the ability to actually work with your own body. There's a pill for everything. They have completely. Now, to me, the medical mafia, that's the real witchcraft. When we're looking at the real witches, there they are. There they are. When we come back to natural, which is the way it should be, the way that these wise women were operating back then, that is the way that, because food is your medicine.
And here's
so when you start eating.
There's another interesting aspect too. These women knew how the body worked. You know, they helped, you know, birth people. They helped do all the things. They knew, they had an intricate knowledge of how the human body works. Okay, And here's the interesting thing about all this. This was the environment of women. This was the thing that women did, because men didn't do this, because men were out fighting wars, plowing the field, raising cattle or whatever it was. They didn't do this. The women were the ones that did this. And that's why the women had the power to do these things. But they understood this. They had the knowledge. They knew how the body worked. They knew how to birth babies. They knew how to do this stuff. And you know, I've often heard that when a farmer, they had a cow that was about to drop, you know, they call that dropping, a cow's about to give birth, he would go get his wife. She would assist in that, because she had birthed human beings, okay? She can certainly do that with a cow, you know. Yeah.
I can
yeah.
that as someone who grew up on the farm as well. Every time there was a difficult birth, my mom was called. I'll tell you that much. My mom was called. And there was no such thing as witchcraft, being called a witch. Women have a natural ability, because men and women our makeup is subtly different. A woman is much more gosh, that's my cat that's just knocked my thing now. Let me just see if it's working again. Okay, woman is much more naturally adept at understanding. She has more of an emotional connection to things, right? So she understands things that are more invisible. Sorry, I want to just fix my camera here. But so, which is why she has which is why women are used so much for witchcraft in the system. There's a deep intuition a woman has, that when it's like water that flows, she knows it, she feels it, she breathes it. It's something you can't explain unless you're experiencing it yourself. Men, on the other hand, of course, because their emotions are generally much more disconnected, because they're taught to disconnect emotions. That's why men, on the other hand, have a much more difficult time feeling these subtleties. Not because they can't, it's just because we've been taught differently. So women have that ability naturally. Natural doesn't mean men can't be it, but it means, and of course, that's why I think when men were going out hunting, gathering, fighting wars and things, women had to keep everything around, which is why in the perfect union, the male and female energy, when they are combined, it's a beautiful union, because they support each other. It's not one competing with the other. It's more of a supportive connection. We've been taught to compete with each other and not work together. That's the first division, right? We have the division on this planet of between male and female, yin and yang, right? Taught that men are stronger and women are weaker. Yes, physically maybe, but we both bring different roles.
And I think that's a very valid point you make there, because the women were cooperating with each other more than the men. The men were more competitive with each other. The women were cooperating more and sharing this knowledge that they had when they got together in certain times, because they had to. When they were attending births or whatever, what's going on. They had to know all this stuff. And I'll tell you another thing that you got to look at too. This is what makes women, I think, in many aspects, so very sensitive to their environment around them and all this stuff, because that was part of their makeup. They were very sensitive to that. They paid more attention to these things than men did. Okay, that's just basically. But now there were some men, by the way, who were teamed as sorcerers, but we call them root doctors. They were mostly men who knew about a lot of the plants and herbs and all that stuff. They were the men that did. They were usually older men who applied themselves to this. But they were also called hoodoo doctors or hoodoo men. They had different names for them. But they weren't practicing witchcraft. They were practicing what I call natural magic, the nature that's around them. They knew the things, they could tell you it's going to be a hard winter by looking at the signs of nature around them, or if snow is on the way, or if it's going to rain, I feel it in my bones, kind of thing on. They knew this kind of stuff too. And then you had the water witches, the people who could find water, and know where to dig wells and stuff. These were people, very sensitive people that were attached to the land and environments around them. But now let's look at the flip side of this, okay? The bad people that were taking this knowledge and using it the wrong way. These were the dark witches of the Appalachians. Now, nowadays we have bandied about a lot the term skinwalkers. You hear people talking about skinwalkers all the time. Well, I want to make something very clear right quick. Skinwalkers are actually only found in the southwestern United States among the Navajos and the Hopi Indians tribes out there. That is the true skinwalker. It's called the Yinanalushi, which means he goes on all fours like an animal. In other words, a man that appears to be an animal. That is the skinwalker there. Now, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, there's skinwalkers in Appalachia. No, these are the Appalachian witches that people talk about. And they talked about them in hushed tones in the dark of night around fire places and stuff. They said, you have to be careful with this woman. She's a witch and all this stuff. They talked about these things and the powers and abilities these women were supposed to have. And they were evil. They weren't out to do good. They were out, to do terrible things, steal babies and eat them, or whatever the situation was. They were doing bad things. And I find this fascinating as well, because you look at the darker side of this, it's that step beyond the good things that some people were doing, and then go over into the darkness. And a lot of the powers of these so-called witches are very fascinating stuff to look at. But the Appalachian witches had a very interesting way of doing the shape-shifting thing. Instead of being what we would term a skinwalker, which is tied to Native Americans, the Appalachian witches were tied to the Scotch, Irish, Celtic cultures. And so they could do the shape-shifting thing too. That's a big power in witchcraft, okay? Shape-shifting is something that they go out to acquire. And we're going to get real freaky here with that, okay? Listen to this. The Appalachian witches supposedly could turn into black jaguars. Now, we had in the Appalachian Mountains, they're making a comeback, by the way. We do have jaguars. And now these cats are not as big as a mountain lion, and I've run into a few mountain lions in my day. The jaguar is not as big as a mountain lion, but it's about the size of your African leopard, probably along those same lines, okay, in that way, or about the size of a cheetah. The cheetah is about maybe slightly a little larger than a cheetah, but the interesting thing about the jaguar is it's very like the cheetah or the leopard. It can come at you from the trees. You better look up, and if you're walking out of the woods, you got to keep an eye on the trees too, not just where you're stepping. You got to be very, very careful with the jaguar, because he can come down. Now, the jaguar being a little bigger than a bobcat, which is a wildcat that we have in the mountains. This would be looking at him saying, this is perfect, because sometimes you have, guess what? Coal black jaguars out there. And they are spooky looking things. So the Appalachian witches supposedly were able to turn into these black jaguars and attack people or steal babies and eat them, or attack your cattle or your sheep or whatever. They were supposed to be able to do, or attack you if they wanted to come after you. That's an interesting story, but they also could take other forms. They could sneak around your house and listen to what you were doing in the form of a crow or a raven sitting on your windowsill. They could be spying on you. And you might remember we talked about in a previous episode with you about the dream witches that could actually project themselves into your dreams. These people also supposedly have, and so do the Appalachian witches, the ability to project their spirits into the animals they want to. They can possess an animal. So instead of turning into a coyote or a wolf, you can put your spirit in that animal and use it to do whatever you want to do, attack somebody or whatever, or just bedevil some people or whatever it is you wanted to do. So what you're looking at no longer would be a coyote, a normal, natural coyote. You're looking now at a coyote with the mind of a woman, a human being in it. that would make it doubly dangerous. Okay, because that's what you're dealing with. What is the greatest weapon that humanity has? If you fight somebody, you can fight them with your hands, you can bite them with your teeth. But the best weapon you have is your brain. That's your number one weapon. That is what has kept humanity at the top of the food chain here, folks. Definitely. The brain. That's your number one weapon. And if you put that into the body of an animal, you're looking at something supernatural. That's where you get the word supernatural at. Yeah. And so if you could do this ability, guess what else you could do with yeah. I'm sorry, what?
Yeah. Sorry, Dennis, and I wanted to say that's where the issue comes in, you see, because that's where the laws, God's natural laws, get abused and all sorts of nonsense starts occurring. You know, when we work in harmony with, it's like, let's say the river is flowing, right? When we work in harmony with the water of the flowing river, right? Get in your kayak, row or whatever, use it to wash, whatever it is. But when you start creating all sorts of issues and blockages and trying to do opposite to what is of the natural flow, and you can start, let's say, then segmenting it off and putting chemicals, and I'm just talking about water. This is what they do with energy. That's what they do with energy. They take something that is natural and good and pure, and
you're twisting it. Yeah, you're warping it. You're warping it and bending it. Yeah. That's what makes dark witchcraft evil. It's what you're violating the natural laws. You're going against what the grain, you might say. You're going against things the way that it's set up. So what you're doing, and that's what I've said about dark witchcraft and this kind of things. Magic is simply bending and changing reality to the way you want it to be. And sometimes that's not a good thing when you do that, because you go against those laws you're talking about. You violate things in a spiritual way, you will pay a price for it eventually. And everybody who practices dark witchcraft, Chantelle, knows that there is a price for what you do. If you violate these laws, spiritual and physical laws that God has set forth,
Dennis, definitely. I mean, we hear so much of that. And about the absolute obscene acts of depravity that the evil ones do, against children, against animals, against nature, but it's so true. They all know they're not allowed to violate those laws. So they're going to try and get away with violating them as long as they possibly can, because they really don't want to face the consequences of their actions mostly. That's my opinion, right? So I think when we realize that, and we realize, like looking at witchcraft per se, it is someone that is so full of fear that has no understanding whatsoever that they have the power within them, because they are created in the image of God. So when you align with God in the true essence of the word and in the true essence of the meaning, when you truly align with Christ, you know that. Then miracles become the order of the day. Magic becomes the order of the day. Nothing you do, nothing you
yeah.
That's what I mean. You become the conduit for good energy. So those who come around you are then benefiting from the fact that you are a conduit for good energy, because now you can show others how. You don't tell them and waffle in all sorts of things, and everyone's trying to learn the stuff parrot fashion, right? You actually become the Christ. And what do I mean when I say that? It's like Jesus said, what I can do, you can do, and better. That's what happens when you allow Christ to flow through you in those moments. You then offer the magic. And it's not magic in a witchcraft way, it's God's natural flow. So it's like we were talking about last time we spoke. It's like Earth takes care of you. You know, suddenly, I mean, you narrowly miss hitting a car by that much for some unbeknown reason, and you fall off a mountain and you land on a tree and you don't have a single scratch on your body. That's the kind of stuff that happens. So it's really, we work with nature.
The problem with dark witchcraft, bad witchcraft, evil witchcraft, whatever name you want to tag it, is you're perverting these things. It's a perversion of nature that you're getting around. I say some of these dark witches are like lawyers. Okay, you got to remember something about lawyers. Most of their job is getting around the law, not upholding the law, but getting around it. You know, and that's the way these people are doing. They're working around the natural laws, the spiritual laws that God has set forth in this universe. And whenever you start doing those things for bad purposes, bad things are going to happen. This is nothing but using negative energy and positive energy. This is the law of the universe. You've got positive, you've got negative. You know, you can hook up with either one, or you can use either one. You know, to their effect. That's what's going on with this dark witchcraft, Chantelle. They're using these powers in bad ways to do bad things, and of course they use people to do this. They're like children. We were talking about the things they do with children, the things they do to women and young boys, and all these different things that are going on. All of these rituals, these dark, evil rituals, are geared to create pain. They're geared to create trauma, fear, and all these other things. That's what they're feeding off of, this negative energy that they're generating. This empowers their negativity more. You know, I've often said, and I've seen this with the demonic entities, they feed off of negative energy because they are negative energy. And it's like a spiritual perpetual motion machine. It keeps going on and on and on. That's the way it runs until you break the cycle. If you don't break the cycle, you're going to get nothing but negative. That's all you're going to get, you know. But positivity works the same way. If you put out positive stuff, you're definitely going to get positive back. And you're going to create and generate positive stuff most of the time, you know, unless you're doing it the wrong way. If you're doing it the wrong way, you're going to have a problem. There's a right way and a wrong way to do everything in this world, no matter what it may be, you know. And that includes witchcraft, okay? Whatever, if you want to give it that title, witchcraft. But let me tell you some of the freaky other things that some of these witches can do, supposedly. Not only can they put their bodies, their mind, their spirits into the bodies of other things, they can actually supposedly possess people too. You know, and do this with people. They can actually project their spirit into your body and make you do things that you would not normally do. You become sort of like a zombie. Okay, you're under somebody else's power. They can do this too. And supposedly, they could get you to murder somebody like that. Now, think about this a moment. Okay, what if I were a bad witch and I put my spirit in your body and I made you go murder your husband? And then I leave your body and you're sitting there, you say, what did I do? What did I do? Why did I do that? What happened? You know, that would be a very bad situation to leave you in, would it not? You know, that I would have you actually commit murder from me and you didn't want to do it. That's a bad situation when you think about it. And so they're supposed to be able to do these things. They're supposed to be able to take over people. And another thing, you know, we talked about earlier in another show that they were actually able to get into your dreams. Well, let me tell you now about the spider witches. Now, folks, I'm going to warn you here, okay? If you don't like spiders, you may not like the rest of this program here, okay? They are supposed to be able to turn themselves into spiders. Now, I'm not talking about little spiders. They can do that. They can make a little spiders, you know. Mostly these are spiders about the size of a cow. And these spiders will actually kill you. Okay, they can actually attack you and kill you and all that stuff. But a lot is said about the spider witches are that they weave the webs of nightmares. In other words, they supposedly are are so bad, so evil, they have that bad of an influence over you that they weave the webs of nightmares in your life. Could you imagine walking into a barn one night, hearing your cattle doing something going on and all that, and look up in the rafters and there's a cow-sized spider up there looking back at you? That would be a bad situation when you think about it. So if you ran into some of the Appalachian witches, they could not only be the form of a jaguar or crow or wolf or dog or pig or whatever they wanted. It could also be a big spider, and you've got a big problem with a big spider. Okay, definitely. But this is another legend in the Appalachians. The spider women, they were called the spider witches. And they could, some of them were like trapdoor spiders. You know, you're familiar with a trapdoor spider. He makes a trapdoor, and when you walk by, boom, he grabs you. Yeah. They could supposedly do this as well. So if you had to be careful where you walked in the woods, you didn't want to run into a spider witch. She could get you in the trapdoor. So you had a lot of stories like this about people that had these abilities to do these things. They were monsters. Okay, that's why I'm wearing my monster cunning hat today. They were considered human monsters. They can do terrible things. And the ornaments they used and stuff, they had to have the blood of fat of unbaptized babies. They would steal babies and leave. They would also leave demon babies in place of these babies. All kind of this stuff. This is a lot of the things that supposedly the Appalachian witches could do. So they were feared greatly in the Appalachians, and you didn't mess with them. You know, if just so and so, there's old Chantelle. She lives up in the mountains. Don't mess with her. She's a witch. You know, she'll get you. Okay, that's the way they would spread these tales about you. And whether or not, here's the interesting thing: whether or not you were really a witch, if they said you were, you might as well be one, because that was the way they treated you. That's the way that went. And that's what unfortunately happened with the Salem witchcraft trials, okay? None of those women were really witches, okay, folks? But they got that tag. They got tagged that way, and they said, well, you know, that's the way you're going to be hung or burned at the stake or whatever the situation was. But most of that was just trying to steal people's property. That's what most of that really was about. But this was a power, though. You got to remember, in certain cultures, there were men who called themselves witch-finder generals. They went around working for the king, hunting out witches to kill them, you know. So they had a great power over women. And so here's another interesting aspect. I want you to think about this, okay? If you could tag a woman as a witch, you had her right where you wanted her. You had power over her that way, because you could have power, life and death over her to that extent. Or you could really definitely stigmatize her to the point where she would be invaluable to the community. In other words, her reputation would be shot. She would be a witch from now on out. Nobody would ever trust her. Nobody would want her around. They would ostracize you. They would keep you out of the community. They would cut you out and say, you're not with us anymore. You're a witch. Go away. Go live out in the woods and leave us alone. That's the way a lot of these women got done. And this is a bad thing, too, when you think about it, you know, because they were, like we said earlier, they weren't really witches. They were healers. They were they were doing the roots and the plants, and they were, and nature and all that stuff. But they got tagged with this because this was a certain social power they could use over these poor women. That's a bad thing to think about.
And that was all part of obviously the deception. Anyway, Dennis, as much as what I'd love to carry on, we're going to have to call it a day. I've got another appointment in less than 20 minutes. But
okay.
Maybe we should continue this conversation in our next show. Actually, it's a very good one, I think, that we could talk a lot around this topic. Actually, there's a lot to discern between what is natural and what we as human beings have forgotten, what to go back to, what we need to go back to, and what really has been corrupted along the way. I think that's going to be a great topic for discussion. So I want to just say thank you, Dennis. Is there anything you would like to just close off with something for the next time? Where can people get hold of you? I'm just going to pop up your banner here as well. What are you up to? Yeah, just let people know where you are over the next little while, Dennis.
Yeah, well, next time we'll do part 2 on the natural powers of the body and and nature. Hooking up with that, that'll be an interesting aspect on that, definitely. People can find me at Hunting the Shadows YouTube podcast channel on YouTube, and come on over and check out some of our podcasts that we do and subscribe. Check us out that's Hunting the Shadows YouTube podcast channel. And also, I have some books available on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Just look up the author, Dennis W. Carroll. My podcasts are on Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again on Friday night at the same time, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And also, if you need to contact me, you can do that through DennisWCarroll.com or DennisWCarroll@gmail.com.
And it's all there, and all Dennis's information is linked in the description area below. And we will see you back in a couple of weeks again, Dennis. Thank you so very much. Always a pleasure having you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us in the chats. Always a pleasure having you all, yeah? I will see you tomorrow for Hang Out with Shanti or Drop In with Shanti. Hang Out with Shanti, Drop In, same thing. Where we put on our tinfoil caps. You bring your chai or whatever beverage of choice you want. It's going to be in the middle of the night for some of you Americanos. That's fine. It's still dark. You can bring whatever beverage of choice you want. And then we're going to talk about, whatever's popped up on my screen or come into my inbox. And we're going to be little conspiracy theorists decoding and detecting what's going on in the rest of the world. Okay, guys. God bless you all. Stay safe out there. And take it easy. Be cool, be kind, and just be you.